Hey everyone. All right, so this is going to be kind of a second part to our low poly asset building tutorial. This is my much more complicated mesh. This is my monitor setup, and obviously a lot crazier than the crate that I had. So I kind of started my low poly here already, so I wanted to kind of show you guys how I'm tackling something with this much detail. If you take a look at my high poly, A, I mean, it's really high, but B, it's made up of a ton of meshes, right? I mean, you know, I built all these things separate, all that kind of stuff. And if I went through and started making individual meshes for each of these bits, there's going to be a lot of faces that are going to be covered up and buried. And that's going to be really, really wasteful. So I'm not going to do that in something this complicated and this ornate. So what I've started doing here is I've started building this mesh as kind of a one piece. Let me show you here if I isolate it. So it is completely seamed together and welded and whatnot. And, there's no overlap whatsoever. All these faces are actually attached. Oops, sorry about that. They're all actually attached. All this stuff is purely connected. The reason for that is that again, for the unwraps, I'm not going to waste any space, any UV space at all. Doing it this way is definitely a lot harder. I mean, it'd be a lot easier just to do everything in chunks. Like I started doing this bit here. This guy's separate. It'd be much easier to do something in chunks and then just have a lot of wasted space and go on with our lives. But with something this complicated, I need as much UV space as I possibly can. Now, saying that, that doesn't mean you can't model all these things separately and then take your time and stitch them together and cut them up and piece them together as you will. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's all personal modeling styles and all that kind of stuff. So you guys kind of tackle things as you feel comfortable tackling them. Oh, my monitor just went black. I was not responding, so I got Unity and other things running in the background. So we're going to go over different ways you can model this stuff. So I've been just box modeling this. This is just extruding things and moving edges along. So with this guy here, I can isolate some of the elements that I'm working on right here. Let's just take those guys and just isolate them. Let me take a look at what I'm doing. So yeah, just again, kind of like we were doing on the other low poly one, just moving these edges along. I'm kind of trying to keep them in line with kind of what's happening and whatnot in my high poly. Yeah, I'm kind of dealing with this guy on his own. I'm going to find a way to kind of weld and stitch him to the rest of my mesh. So if we take a look here, I have this big inset over here. But on my low poly, I've just modeled it really flat. The reason for that is I have a tank that's going to go over top of this thing, and it's, let's take a look here. I just hide this guy. There's a tank and stuff in here, and maybe I'll model this in a little bit because it does break the silhouette. It might be kind of junky to do it there, but just kind of to start, I've been doing that. I haven't done any of the pipes yet. Those I'm probably going to do separate just because in my older version, I probably have low poly versions of these pipes. I might even be able to use just these as they are and then optimize them later once I'm done baking. So that's kind of where I am with this. Nothing really special going on here for the most part. Again, just extruding using the cut tool to cut along places. You see here I've cut along this edge here from this mesh, so then I can go ahead and start extruding from there. And then I would move these guys to where they belong and start extruding from there. So I want to talk to you guys about a couple just principles, I guess, for low poly. I can't really, I can just model this in front of you, but you're not going to learn too much. I mean, most of it's just pull inverts and doing stuff. But there's a few things I just wanted to talk about. Number one is chamfering and kind of edge detail. We talked a little bit about it during the crate, about keeping edges smooth and doing that kind of stuff. But sometimes you might get smaller edges, you know, an edge like, let's say this one, for instance. Um, you know, how low poly should you go with that? And again, that's kind of up to you, knowing how far away your mesh is going to be from the viewer. But I would probably go fairly high detail on it at first. Now I'm doing a terrible job here because a lot of these things are kind of separate. And I was trying to model them kind of together like that. So this is kind of a, you know, bit of a harder edge. I might even move this down and then move this guy over here and then kind of continue that. This is getting really gross in here, so I'm going to spend some time cleaning this up, kind of deciding, you know, whether this is a corner or whether this should flow along here. You know, maybe I'll do a bit of a chamfer there. Not quite sure yet. That's kind of looking really weird, so I might just cap this off, delete this, and then kind of continue from there separately. Sometimes modeling things all together causes some issues, so sometimes you have to kind of just extrude edges, you know, a couple edges at a time, and weld things up later on. So if I did this, for instance, you know, maybe I would just start extruding this one edge to match what I'm doing here. And then I can use tools like the bridge modifier to start bridging this stuff like that. You know, that's not bad. This I might, maybe I'll carry over. I mean, I guess this thing isn't really where it should be anyways. Yeah, I'm probably going to carry that over just to get a nicer edge there. So I can do a couple things. I can do insert vertex on my edges, and then move that vert to where I want it to be, connect it. And then these guys I can just kind of bring down to here. That's a little better. I'll do that on the other side there too eventually. Some things like, say, this guy, for instance, there's two of these things, and they're symmetrical on the center. Now, even though it's all attached in here, honestly, what I would probably do at this point is take all these faces, detach them from my main mesh, you know, just straight up detach as a new object, or you can call it whatever you want, and just work on it separately. Just you know, I didn't even detach this stuff because it doesn't really matter right now. Oops, I missed that edge there. But really, what I would do is I would isolate these guys, and I would work on this thing just on its own. And the reason for that is that I can use the symmetry modifier and not really have to worry about you know, how everything's being connected right now. So you know, a lot of times that'll save you a lot of grief. So learn to kind of break your mesh up into segments. Think about, you know, how you can make life easier on yourself, because trying to model everything out of one box and always thinking about, you know, where things are going to be connecting at all times, it's just too much. You're going to make a mess for yourself. You're going to end up having just a ton of edges in places. So sometimes, you know, you just got to be, you just got to know when to call it quits in some areas and be like, you know what, I'm going to detach this thing, I'm going to work on it separate so I don't lose my mind, and then I will worry about attaching it later, because sometimes trying to do too much at once is just not worth the hassle. You'll just stress yourself out, and you're not going to get your work done in a quick and orderly fashion. So you know, treat yourself sometimes. Just break things up. It's all good. You know, you're not going to stress out. Anyway, so I'm kind of extruding things here and doing my thing, and you know, I can kind of keep going with that. Now, the problem I'm having, you start seeing, is I'm moving this one edge, I'm trying to move this other edge, but they're not. You know, I'm trying to figure out where they're actually like sticking to this mesh, and I'm constantly moving things in and out. real giant pain in the butt, right? Not really a fun experience trying to move these edges around and making sure they work. So I'm going to show you guys another tool. I think I've covered in this course or my YouTube channel before, but it's probably one of my favorite tools that Max has done, and it is the extend kind of tool modifier here in the freeform area. What it lets you do is it lets you model basically using another mesh. I'm going to use this high poly as like a collision base, if you will, and it'll allow me to snap my vertices and faces and things like that on top of this, so I know when things are actually kind of where they need to be without eyeballing everything. So I have my low poly. Typically, I'll start a low poly with just like a couple faces. This is a little further than I would usually go before I jump into extend. But what I'll do is I'll select this guy. So this was my low. And the first thing you're going to do under freeform, there's a little guy here that he'll say grid, and he'll be highlighted in blue most likely. If you click him and select the little drop-down menu, select Draw on Surface, and then a little pick button will appear below that. So click that, and then hover over your high poly model. You'll see it'll have a yellow outline if you're using 2017. And you'll click that, and the name of it will appear over here. Mine is very poorly named, so I'm assuming I clicked the right thing. So what this will now let you do is this will now work with a lot of these other tools. This is what you're going to be painting on, basically you're modeling on top of. This offset modifier, a little dialog here, we're going to go back to that. This is basically how high off this mesh are you going to be building stuff on, like how offset your verts and polygons and faces are going to be. So I typically do it a little bit, like 0.5, 0.3, 0.1, whatever I feel is necessary. Then you're going to go to your polydraw tools. I'm just going to kind of explain things here a little bit. There's a little guy here called min distance, and this works with the strip tool and the branch tool. There's also a new object, so if I didn't want to start with this low poly here, if I wanted to start with just a brand new object, I didn't actually have anything built yet, I can click on whatever, say I had this, just so you have to have something clicked. I can just go new object, and it'll just make me a brand new object with no faces, no vertices, kind of like an empty game object in Unity. You'll see surface is still selected here. Now your min distance, remember I told you that works here with your strips and branches. This is a way that I sometimes just start a low poly just to get something. So if I select strips and I start just clicking and dragging over top of this mesh, you'll see it'll build strips on top of that mesh, and it'll try and match it. And you'll see here it's hovering off of the mesh a little bit, and that's what my offset does. So if I turn this to 0 and I do strips, you'll see it's trying to snap directly onto that, which is good, but the annoying thing is sometimes you can't see it really well because it's actually underneath, so it's good just to do it a little bit just so you can see it and whatnot. So your min distance, this is actually controls how big these polygons are when you're using something like strips. So you see here now they're gigantic. So the reason, if I was going to start with a new object, sometimes I just go and go boop, and just make one face, and that way I have something to start working off of. So that's kind of what that's for. But we're not going to use this guy, so I'm going to delete that object. I'm going to work off of this little guy. So we're going to be basically living inside our extend menu here. So once you click it on, you're in extend mode, and extend mode lets you basically model the hell out of stuff without ever leaving this menu. Lets you do a lot of the functionality that you have in Edit Poly without having to select different buttons. It's all just various keyboard shortcuts. And once you get really good at this, your modeling speed is going to increase dramatically because it's just way less button clicks than kind of what you're used to. So we're going to go over some shortcuts and how things work, but if you ever forget, you can just hover over the extend, and it has all of the things in here. So typically when I work in extend, I'll work in my vert mode just so I can see where all my vertices are if I don't want to work in this mode because it might be too high poly or whatever. So with this mesh already existing, there's a few things we can do. If you hold Control and Alt and Shift, that's a lot of buttons to hold. If you hold all three of those down and you hover over a vert, it will select it for you. So if I select this vert here, it's actually selected, and I can do things like hit backspace to remove it, like I would typically for edit poly. Oh, yeah. So that lets you select things, and that lets you move them and whatnot too. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's number one, so that's just selecting. Number two is your shift. If you just hold shift and you click and drag from an edge, it will extrude that edge for you. So let's see how this works here. So let's say we had this guy here, and we held shift and started dragging out. Now what's happening is, it might be a little hard to tell from this viewport, or this view, but it's actually trying to conform to the mesh that I have here. And if I click over these guys, if I hold Control, Alt, and Shift, I can move these guys around too by clicking. And you'll see they're actually snapping to that high poly mesh here. So you'll see it's snapping all over the place. I'm not just moving it in world space. It's trying its best to snap onto that by this offset. So if I'm finding this is still, too much. And what this will allow me to do is, now I've extruded that guy, and he is now perfectly snapping to my high poly mesh. So I can go through here, I can hold shift again and extrude another guy. Now I can hold shift again, and because I'm starting to hover over this upper part here, you'll see it's starting to stick to that. Then I could hold Control, Alt, and Shift together to select and move my vertices. Sometimes it does a kind of a weird thing for you. I probably don't need all of that detail, so I might just move this edge right on top here. You'll see sometimes you'll know that, hey, I don't need to model all of this interior space into my low poly. That's perfectly okay. So I can just keep going with my shift. I'm just extruding things, and you'll start seeing, like, oh, hey, that's not conforming to the mesh all that great. Maybe this chamfer is a little too, or maybe I placed my edges a little too low. And you'll start figuring out, oh, yeah, maybe about there is a good place to start doing the curve. You'll see it starts cutting through, so you're like, oh, my curves are too much. And you kind of just move it back till you can see your whole mesh. And that way, you don't have to worry about, whether this is too smooth, because it's nicely covering it up. And then I can extrude one way. All right, I can move this back. And sometimes when you extrude things on like weird angles, you might get this, but sometimes you just have to worry about one vert at a time. So I'm just trying to line this bottom left vertex here, letting this guy do whatever, and then I'm just going to move him down over here as well. And I can extrude that down there. And now I can kind of decide what I want to do with this whole gap thing here, but I'll do that in a little bit. So I can move things around. I can move around any vert, even if it was created before. It doesn't matter. All right, so that's kind of just the shift tool, just to extrude. Now you can see here I've modeled a good chunk of this without clicking anything. It's just keyboard shortcuts, clicking and moving edges and vertices. It's really fast. I really enjoy it. Now, once you have a corner like this, once you have a vertice that's kind of in a 90-degree thing, you don't have to hold any button whatsoever. You just click and drag out that vertice, and it will create a new face for you right out of that corner. It's quite nice and quite fast. Now, if you create yourself something, let's say we shift drag this guy out all the way to the bottom. All right, let's say right there. Make sure these guys are close enough to the edge so when they carry over. Now we have this interesting section here where there's a gap here. Now I can extrude this and then try and weld it, but what you can do is hold Control and Alt, and by clicking and dragging from this edge to this edge, I'm going to bridge it. Okay. Super nice, nice and fast, without ever having to leave this menu, and that's why this is the best. Because leaving menu sucks. Takes forever. This is getting a little ugly here. Maybe, maybe a little bit of something like that. I can always do backspace on that guy. Ooh, that's not looking good. I'll have to kind of figure out, maybe, maybe this drops all the way down to the bottom. Maybe, oh yeah, so that's kind of the one problem with extend. Sometimes you think you're snapping to one thing, but you're actually snapping to something else. So sometimes you got to go through and just kind of manually do some stuff. And if you don't like what you're doing, you can just backspace it. If you don't like a face, you can hold Control and click on a face, and it will just delete that face right there. Sometimes you're just making stuff and it is not going for you. So, you're like, yeah, you know what, let's just start this over. Maybe we do need to go a little bit more detailed with this low poly for now. Maybe offset's a little too high. Alright, all depends on the scale of your mesh and whatnot, on how, how crazy you can get away with the offset and stuff like that. So I'm going to play around with this guy, kind of figure out, how much detail I really think he needs. I'm probably going way too high poly with this. I can probably, simplify this thing down quite a bit to maybe just, like a simple kind of mesh there. Let me bring up that offset again because I lowered it. Lower your offset that much, you're probably working too close to your mesh. That's another thing. When you are working on your low poly, this happens to me all the time. Sometimes I start building my low polys, and then somebody will walk by and be like, "Wow, that's a really high poly, low poly." And basically, what happens is you start working too close to your mesh. So I isolated this thing, so now I'm working like super close. But if I actually zoom out and be like, "Hey, you know what? This thing is only like this big on my mesh." I don't really need to be zooming in and doing all this detail. Like this is, probably way overkill for what I need right now. So sometimes you just got to step back. So it's kind of something you guys should be careful about when you're working on your low poly, is not to get too caught up in, how crazy and detailed you really need to make it. I mean, that just comes with practice and making mistakes. And I still do it all the time. So yeah, this is looking kind of fugly. I might take a look at this again. Might just simplify it a little bit more. But anyways, that's kind of the extend tool. In and on itself, it's not very complicated. It's you're just moving verts around and doing some stuff, moving, deleting, bridging. Right, this is getting really ugly. But it's hella useful, right? I mean, it's super fast. It's really elegant. You're in one menu, which I always love. Again, the more menus you can avoid, the better. I'm probably going too crazy with that. It's actually a really troublesome mesh with all this interior business. I might just kind of simplify the whole thing. Maybe just do a big box over that and a big box over this thing here. So anyways, so yeah, extend, really sweet. And you can use it for a whole bunch of stuff.